I'm Marty Cohn, and this is BCTV's Meet the Candidates 2020, sponsored in part by Brattleboro Savings and Loan. This series affords you an opportunity to hear from the folks running for elected office. Today, our guest is Molly Gray, the Democratic Party candidate for Vermont Lieutenant Governor. Welcome, Miss Gray.
Hi, Marty. Thank you so much for having me. Great to join you today.
All right, well, okay, great. So I'm just going to throw out some questions and you can answer them any way you wish. But the first one is, why are you seeking the office of Lieutenant Governor?
Marty, what a year we're having. I mean, a global pandemic, justifiable social unrest, our economy's being challenged in every way possible. I'll admit this isn't the first time I've had folks ask me that question. A little bit about me. I grew up in Orange County on a vegetable and dairy farm. I'm a proud product of Vermont's education system. I've worked both in Washington with our congressional delegation for Congressman Welch, around the globe with the Red Cross, now serve as an assistant attorney general statewide. And I'm running for lieutenant governor because we continue to talk about how to keep a generation in Vermont or draw a generation back. As you know, and as so many Vermonters know, we have huge challenges when it comes to our demographics. Our population is aging. And we haven't figured out how to address the needs of a generation that we need to stay here, to thrive, to engage in our communities, to work in our communities. So I'm running because I think I can be part of the solution to help elevate the voices of rural Vermont, elevate the voices of the next generation, and really bring all of our generations together now as we face some of our greatest challenges, be it economic development and prosperity, be it childcare and paid family and medical leave, equal access to broadband, some of the things I'm really happy to talk about today. But we're at a very important moment, and I think if we can come together and work together, we're going to do a lot of good for Vermont as we move forward.
So there are a number of people who are seeking the office of Lieutenant Governor. What sets you apart from the other candidates?
Yeah, I think I have a pretty diverse and different background. I'll be the first to admit I haven't worked in the state house before. I have worked in Congress and understand the legislative process well. But I've lived and worked in our communities across the state, in Rutland and Tunbridge and South Royalton and Newberry, where I grew up and my folks still farm today, in Burlington. And I think this is a moment where we need a diversity of experience, both the experience of someone who has worked as an attorney statewide, but also worked in human rights and humanitarian response and crisis, because we are in a global pandemic still. And at some point, we're going to have to move out of the crisis response and into development and recovery for Vermont. So I bring that background as well. I'm a really proud product, as I said, of Vermont's education system, of the University of Vermont and Vermont Law School, a small local elementary school in Newberry at a time when I think understanding how our education system works, some of the changes we need to make, understanding the needs of our rural communities. As you know, I don't talk about rural communities from afar. I grew up in a rural community that I love and cherish, and we have massive workforce challenges. As I said, access to broadband is such a critical issue right now, not only as we think about our schools reopening, and they're opening now, as you know, but economic development, telemedicine. So as someone who grew up in rural Vermont, as someone who's also worked nationally, worked internationally in crisis, but also around our states, I think I'm uniquely equipped to help use the lieutenant governor's office, but also to work with our governor, whomever that may be, in the legislature and our communities to move us forward on a number of key issues, top among them, how to keep a generation here and draw a generation back.
All right, so that's a segue to my next question, which would be, if you're elected, what would be your top two priorities if you're elected Lieutenant Governor?
It's always hard to pick two, but I would probably put childcare and broadband right up at the top. And let's be clear, Lieutenant Governor, it's kind of the bully pulpit sometimes. It's the position where you can get out to communities around the state, bring those perspectives. As I mentioned earlier, when it comes to broadband, something like 70,000 homes and residences still don't have access. All you need to do is drive through Orange County or parts of Windham County or Bennington, and you don't have cell service. And while that was a challenge before COVID, it's an incredible challenge now as we think about remote work, which will continue, and online learning. I know a lot of schools are opening where there's partial in-class learning, partial remote learning. I was just listening to the radio this morning, and teachers without internet having to call students on landlines and try to go through lesson plans for the day. So I see closing that broadband gap as an absolute imperative. And I know we have governors and lieutenant governors that have talked about that probably for decades now. But I think we're at a moment where, in partnership with our congressional delegation and getting federal funding to Vermont, in partnership with our communications union districts and with the legislature, we can sit down and figure out how to get this done. It will be a long process, but really to put that plan in place. So I'd like to use my office to be a tool in the toolkit, to be a person who's there and ready to help make that happen and really be a voice for rural communities. It's a huge economic opportunity for Vermont as well, as we think about people moving to our state and where we do and don't have internet, and homes that people do and do not want to buy just based on that. But second, childcare, I think, is one of the greatest economic investments we can make right now in terms of, all you need to do is talk to our working parents who are trying to figure out this balance during this pandemic. We need people to be able to work. We need people to be able to pay taxes and get back to a routine that allows for paying the bills and taking care of children. I think we can do that by expanding the child care assistance programs that we have in the state, by expanding eligibility, by expanding our reimbursement rates, making sure that our child care providers have all the personal protective equipment they need. And while it may cost money to do that now, we will see the return on investment. So I know you said two, and I went into depth, but I see those two as some of the greatest investments we can make. And I know that our business leaders largely agree with that. So I think we can come together and make it happen in the years ahead.
I hope that's true, because childcare, finding and affording childcare, really important. But let's go to the other end of the age spectrum. Recent reports indicate that seniors in Vermont face one of the highest rates of financial insecurity in the nation. How do you think we can make life for seniors more affordable?
Absolutely. I started today talking about our demographic challenges. And I think on the one hand, we talk about keeping a generation here, or drawing a generation back. But on the other hand, I think we haven't fully acknowledged or collected the data or addressed the fact that we have a growing older Vermonter population. That includes my parents and uncles and aunts and family as well. I certainly want to be able to care for them and pay the bills, which is why I think paid family and medical leave is so important. As parents age, if there's a family crisis, you want to be able to help family through that time and not have to choose. I don't think anyone should have to choose. I think as we think about the infrastructure of Vermont with an aging population, we start recognizing that we don't have safe and accessible housing. While we have a lot of good housing stock, as we know, in a lot of our rural communities, it's not set up in a single story fashion or with lifts or with more accessible entryways. I think that's one piece. I think expanding access to Medicaid and Medicare. We've got prescription drug costs that are high. I don't think it's solely the legislature in Montpelier that needs to address these different issues and coming up with a plan to take care for older Vermonters. I think it's something we also have to do in conjunction with our federal delegation, and kind of depending on the programs that we have, making sure that there's sufficient funding coming together, bringing the elder care experts that we have in Vermont together to make sure that all Vermonters can age at home, can age with dignity, can age with support, can age with proper financial support, with healthcare, and access to universal and primary care in our communities is extremely, extremely important. You know, the worst case scenario is when someone has to go to the hospital. I think we want to encourage preventative care as much as possible. So all that's to say that I don't think there's one simple answer. I think it's working with our congressional delegation, working statewide, bringing the experts to the table, and coming up with a real plan to care for our older Vermonters.
All right, thank you. So, you know, I'm doing a lot of reading about the concept of a vision for Vermont, and it's been a while since we've had a vision for Vermont that takes into account all the different issues and aspects of Vermont that you've articulated. So what would be your vision for Vermont in a post-COVID world?
Oh, I'm smiling because I think out of our greatest challenges always come our greatest opportunities. And we knew before COVID-19 that I think about 50% of Vermonters couldn't afford an emergency expense of $1,000 or more. I mean, that's pretty scary. And then throw COVID on top of that, and everything has been laid bare, right? We already talked about childcare. We already talked about broadband, which how is it in 2020 we still have equal access to broadband? I won't belabor the point, but I imagine a Vermont where we have a strong and resilient food system, where we've supported this growing economy of young farmers and food producers that help us become more secure, not only in the face of this pandemic or in future pandemics or challenges, but in the face of climate change. I imagine a Vermont where we have a thriving green economy, where we have investments in solar and weatherization. I imagine a Vermont where we do have childcare, where we also have paid family and medical leave, not only because they're the right things to do as we put people before politics, but it's also going to make us more economically viable for the future, where we're more inclusive, where we are more diverse and more welcoming, where we've addressed systemic racism where it exists in our communities, perhaps where we're not the whitest state in the country, when you think about being a state that's more welcoming to a changing world. That's the Vermont that I see for the future. That's the Vermont that I'm excited about. But most importantly, that's the Vermont that I hear about from Vermonters every day as I physically get around the state or jump on Zoom calls or host town halls. We are resilient, we are innovative, we're thinking about the future, and I think it's time to bring our minds, our spirits, our resilience and our strength together and to really align our budget with our greatest needs and get a lot of good stuff done, if I may.
Okay, good vision, good vision. So last question for today is, what do you want voters to know about you?
I work really hard. I understand the needs and want to be an advocate for our rural communities, our local school system, our small towns, our businesses, our co-working spaces, our farmers. I have a background and training in human rights, and as Eleanor Roosevelt once said, or asked and answered rather, where does human rights begin? It begins right here in our communities at home. And I'll fight for human rights. I'll fight for the needs and rights of all Vermonters. That my experience is diverse and I'm ready to lead. I've led missions and teams into Baghdad, into East Africa, in Nigeria. I've worked in crisis. I understand the law and the importance of the rule of law, but I also understand and value the importance of policy and advocacy. I see myself as someone we need in this moment to bring Vermonters together, to help take us forward and to create a more inclusive, a more diverse, a more resilient, and a more economically viable Vermont for the future.
Molly Gray, the Democratic Party candidate for Vermont Lieutenant Governor, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
You can learn more by visiting her campaign website, mollyforvermont.com, Molly for Vermont, and Vermont is spelled out, The general election is Tuesday, November 3rd. Remember, you could vote early in person, you could vote absentee by mail, or vote absentee hand delivered on election day. Whichever way works for you, please vote. Thanks for watching Meet the Candidates 2020, sponsored in part by Brattleboro Savings and Loan. I'm Marty Cohn. Stay healthy.